Shadow the Hedgehog is a very weird entity of a game. This game came out during an era that's known as the Dark Era, or the Dark Age of Sonic games. A period that typically dominated the 2000s up to the mid-2010s. Now, I've been playing this game lately on my Dolphin emulator, because the last time I played this was when I was a wee lad. A close friend of mine owned this game, just kind of like how he owned every single game, and we played one level and kind of called it quits. But I have since decided to give this game another chance, and today's video is whether or not to see my opinion has changed or not. This game does involve some very interesting mechanics, and mechanics that we will go into more detail later, as well as a very convoluted and bloated story that you have to play for about 250,000 times just to get the canon ending. But I went on this journey so that you guys wouldn't have to. Now, Shadow the Hedgehog is quite a controversial game because of the tonal shift it took, the direction that it went in, and just how it kind of bastardized the character of Shadow. It tries so hard to try and make sense of why and how Shadow came back, but I just think in some capacity it just does a pretty poor job at it. However, it's not all bad. There are things about this game that I like. Believe it or not, the guns in this game are kind of a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. I just find it really amusing how you're running around as this 4-foot adorable black hedgehog with oversized miniguns that clip through the floor. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Shadow the Hedgehog. Before we jump into the meat and gravy of this game's story, I just want to preface and just say that this is the OG version of the game. Well, as OG as it possibly can be through an emulator. Yes, I'm fully aware that there is the Reloaded mod that makes this game a lot more playable, fixes a lot of the issues that was with this game at release, gives widescreen support, etc, etc. But if I'm going to be talking about this game, I'd rather be talking about the one that came out in 2005, not a mod that was released for this game to fix all of its problems. So I just thought I'd clarify that, just so that you guys know. Anyway, onwards. The synopsis of Shadow the Hedgehog, at least to me, is a relatively short one. It takes place after the events of Sonic Heroes, where Shadow was suffering from amnesia and couldn't really remember who he was. This was Sonic Team's attempt of trying to retcon Shadow back to life, and thus leading to the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, as they try so hard to explain how Shadow the Hedgehog survived at the end of Sonic Adventure 2.
Right, I'd kill you like that.
Flipping neck, man, would you?
Yeah, of course.
That's what I thought I was joking a bit there, bro.
So Shadow is given some options. He's visited by the alien entity known as Black Doom, who demands that Shadow brings him all 7 Chaos Emeralds. And initially, Shadow obliges because he wants to find out who he was in the past and who these people were in his life. He is aware of the name Maria, but doesn't actually know who Maria was. All he knows is that Maria was someone very important in his life, but he just cannot seem to remember why. And thus, as the game unfolds, as you play through the game's branching story, you start to figure out just who Shadow is and who Maria was. This game has 10 non-canon endings, meaning that you have to play through this game at least 10 times to unlock all the non-canon endings and thus unlocking the last story. Each stage in this game gives you multiple missions to complete. You're given a dark mission, you're given a normal mission, and you're given a hero mission. Depending on which one you complete during that stage depends on where the story goes next. These missions, however, don't really have that much variation. The hero and dark missions will usually require you to either destroy certain objects or kill a number of enemies depending on which side you actually work for, whereas the neutral missions typically mean that you have to just get to the end of the stage, whether that means finding the Chaos Emerald or the Goal Ring. I know this technically should have been covered in the gameplay section, but I still think it has a bearing on the game's story, considering that you have to play through these stages and missions multiple times to reach these certain endings, but I will go into more detail about these missions in the gameplay section. The best way I can describe this game's story is that it's just this massive convoluted mess that just tries way too hard. Like, I don't even think they had a sense of direction when making this game. I just think they looked at other mature games and just thought, we can do that. An example that I'll use is the gun commander in this game, who was supposedly so close with Maria, but he ends up working for Gun anyway. You know, the people who shot and killed her.
When are we gonna make sense, bro? Please. I beg you.
And listen, I know that he initially blames Shadow for Maria's death, but there is a scene in this game where he realises that actually it was Gun behind the murder of Maria, and not Shadow. But he sticks with Gun anyway? Maybe it was something to do with Maria's wish, I don't know. I know it certainly was for Shadow, but for the Gun commander, if I was a commander of that organisation, the organisation that murdered one of my closest friends, regardless of her wish, I would not want any part of it. Do you know what would have been better? Leave Gun and create another organisation to honour Maria's wish of protecting humanity and the planet. Like, I just think that would have been so much better. I think another major problem I have with this story is just the direction that they took Shadow in. They changed him from this cocky, cool anti-hero who, especially at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, gave himself purpose, remembered what he was meant to do, and sacrificed himself for the greater good, to this broody, edgy, menacing guy. I understand that they tap into his amnesia and that's probably why he's behaving this way, but we need to remind ourselves he also had amnesia in Sonic Heroes, and he was nothing like this. It's a game story that just takes itself way too seriously. It lacks that usual charm that Sonic games had, and still have to this day. There's no real uplifting moments here. Everybody's angry, everybody's edgy, and everybody takes things way too seriously, and it just doesn't fit a Sonic game. I know people are going to bring up Sonic Frontiers, but even Sonic Frontiers had a lot of light-hearted moments despite the fact's overall serious tone to the story. And yes, Sonic games usually do take themselves seriously 90% of the time, but they know when to be serious and when to be funny, and Shadow the Hedgehog just does not have that funny side of it. It's just edgy. Now I know people are going to bring up stuff like, where's that damn 4th Chaos Emerald? But that wasn't funny by design, that was funny because of how outlandish and ridiculous it was. And listen, I know there's people out there who like this story, and if you do like this story, then power to you. But to me, this is the weakest aspect of this entire game. Yes, I prefer the buggy and sometimes broken gameplay because I can genuinely get some kind of joy out of it. But this game's story and this version of Shadow, I'm just not invested in. But I'm glad that future games since this have had a return to form with the character of Shadow the Hedgehog. I'd even argue that Sonic 06 did a great job with the character of Shadow, but here, no, just not for me. And it is to the point where I just find myself not really caring about the game's story after 1 or 2 runs. And the fact that you have to do this at the very least 10 times to unlock the last story is mind-numbingly dull. This is where all my credibility, implying that I even have any, goes completely out the window. I kind of like Shadow the Hedgehog's gameplay. Don't worry, ironically, like, I don't enjoy this game unironically. Like, there are so many flaws. Like, I have such a long list of what's so wrong with this game's gameplay, but at the same time, I do actually get some kind of joy out of it because of how stupid it is and because of how broken it is. Like, me replaying through this game for the first time in God knows how long actually made me understand why people gravitate towards games like Sonic 06, because they're so bad they're kind of good to some degree. Shadow 05's gameplay is very unique, and that is definitely putting it mildly. I mean, considering that it is a complete departure from the usual Sonic formula is just a thing in itself. A small 4-foot black hedgehog running around with oversized miniguns and SMGs is just hilarious to me, and it just has some kind of unique charm that no other Sonic game has. And you know how I said with the story where it just felt too depressing, too edgy, and there was just no joy to be had there? Well, I get a lot of my joy from how this game plays, because again, from a visual standpoint, it's absolutely hilarious seeing this small hedgehog run around with like fucking rocket launchers. Now, while Shadow 05 retains the typical Sonic gameplay with the platforming, combat is more encouraged than ever here. Do you remember how in Sonic Heroes you had the Team Blast mechanic? So when you took out enemies, you'd fill up a gauge, and then when that gauge was full, you could unleash a very powerful team attack. Whereas here in Shadow 05, you have 2 meters that you can fill up depending on what type of enemies that you take out. Whether you take out enemies related to the hero mission, or whether you take out enemies related to the dark mission. When Shadow fills the hero gauge, or the blue gauge if you will, this gives Shadow the ability of chaos control. When activated, Shadow propels himself forward at lightning speed, and will continue to do so until the gauge runs out. This is actually very good if you want to complete the stage super quick, as it's pretty automated and you don't really have to do anything until it deactivates. And it will always deactivate where there's no pitfalls. At least in my experience it didn't. Now on the flip side, if you were to fill the red gauge instead, or the dark gauge if you will, Shadow will gain access to a power called Chaos Blast. Now Chaos Blast is exactly what it says on the tin. It is a large explosion that Shadow expels from within, and it clears out a certain amount of enemies within a certain radius. And you can keep repeating this move as long as you still have something in the red gauge. However, one thing I've noticed, and this could be because of my emulator, it's got the same button mapping as to dropping a weapon. So if I want to get rid of a weapon and one of my gauges are full, it will activate the ability even though I don't want it to activate. So if I see a better weapon on the ground and one of my meters are full, it will do the ability when I don't want it to do the ability, because maybe if it's in terms of chaos control, I'm wanting to complete a certain objective, or if it's Chaos Blast, I'm surrounded by enemies, or at that time probably not surrounded by enemies, I've wasted the ability ability, and it's a bit irritating. The homing attack in this game is low-key kind of pathetic. Like, it makes sense to use it on weaker enemies that take 1, maybe 2 hits at most to take down, instead of wasting your ammo, but the homing attack here, after that, kind of pointless, which I guess makes sense considering guns were a massive selling point of this game, and a lot of enemies do require guns to take them down. There's a boss fight quite early on in this game where you're following this tank, and it is a hero mission, so you have to take it down before it reaches its goal, otherwise you fail the hero mission. Using homing attacks on this is like slapping it with a wet napkin. It does little to no damage at all, so guns are really only your viable option here. Also, I can't lie, the way Shadow controls in this game is inconsistent. It's not terrible, but it's also not great. Naturally, Sonic games back in the early 2000s did feel a little bit slippery at times, and it's no different here. However, when you get momentum with Shadow, he is quite satisfying to control, but as you're building momentum, I think that's where people will struggle the most. Because Shadow is wanting to go really fast, but if you're not going really fast, he is a little bit difficult to control. And also as well, you will die to a lot of Class A shithousery bullshittery. I mean, there have been times when I've used the lightspeed dash, and instead of going through the rings, it's decided to throw me horizontally where there's a bottomless pit. Also, when you take damage from an enemy, it's almost impossible to recover from it because you are stunned into oblivion. This is made even worse when you are homing attacking your way over a bottomless pit and you get hit and there is absolutely no way to recover from this. And in my opinion, the triangle jump kind of sucks in this game. It's certainly a step backwards from what it was in Heroes. And listen, this could be an emulation issue, but sometimes it feels like there's an input delay to the point where the inputs don't even register. So you end up jumping onto a wall and then falling because the game just doesn't respond to your inputs. And while, like I say, this could be an emulation problem, I highly doubt it because this seems to be a common criticism with Shadow the Hedgehog. However, I will say one great addition to this game is the fact that when you get hit, you do not lose all your rings. So if you have enough rings in this game, you can afford to be hit more than twice and you'll still survive. Personally, I think it makes this game more forgiving, and I think that's a good thing considering how frustrating it can be to play this game at times. And I know I did say that I would elaborate a little bit more on the types of missions that you are given with each stage, but there's not really that much to elaborate on. The missions kind of vary between killing X amount of enemies, maybe helping some NPCs, destroying some objects or enemies, and the likes of. It's kind of it. There's not really that much variation, and more often than not you'll be repeating the same kind of mission more than once in each playthrough. Now, despite all of the gripes that I have with this game, it is kind of a guilty pleasure. Like I said earlier on in this segment, there is just some kind of weird charm to it that no other Sonic game has, and I do kind of enjoy it. That being said though, I can't genuinely say that this game has great gameplay. There are Sonic games from around this era that just do it better, and there's a reason why people consider this game the start of the Dark Age. I think it obviously goes without saying that Shadow 05 was an extremely controversial game when it first came out. From its theming, to its ideas, to its storytelling, everything about this game was considered controversial. Even when it first got announced and revealed, a lot of people pointed and laughed at this game and thought it was some out-of-season April Fool's joke.
Is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
And I completely understand why people felt this way. You were taking these colourful, lovable characters that we've all known and loved for years and years, and you're making them say words like damn and hell, giving them guns and putting them in a very serious, edgy situation that just doesn't quite work. Sonic games are no stranger to experiment back in these days. Every single Sonic game that would come out would have this new gimmick behind it. Shadow 05 with the guns, Sonic 06 with the element of time travel, Sonic Unleashed with the Werehog. It was a common practice that Sega took, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And in Shadow 05's case, the general consensus is that it didn't work, and that the backlash and the criticism is completely justified. That's not to say that this game can't be fun, but to say this game was controversial at the time is quite the understatement. I'll give Sega and Sonic Team some credit in saying they had massive balls making a game like this and releasing it unironically. So I'll give him credit there. But despite all the controversy surrounding this game has recently received a lot of love as of late. I've been seeing more and more videos popping up where people are actually defending Shadow 05 and actually appreciate the fact that it tried something new. Some people are genuinely saying that this game is actually good and has always been good, but I suppose you always get that with pretty much every Sonic game in existence, so make of that what you will. I mean, let's be honest, what Sonic game in the 2000s wasn't controversial? You could even call Sonic Unleashed controversial to some degree just because of the werehog. Yes, that game actually had its stout haters all the way back in 2008. It was not very well received at all, much like Shadow 05. But as these games get older, I've noticed that these games get more and more appreciation from people who played them way back in the day. Shadow 05 in general is just an absolute, and I mean this with the greatest respect, a clusterfuck of a game. From the controversies that we addressed, to the overly convoluted story with about 50 billion endings, with only one ending really meaning anything, to the really buggy, glitchy gameplay, the edginess, the guns, etc, etc. Need I go on? But at the end of the day, I'm not gonna lie, I had a lot more fun with this game than I remember. Sure, it's not perfect, and I wouldn't consider it anywhere near a top Sonic game. It is riddled with problems, and I understand why people hate this game so much. But at the same time, I do see where the fun can be had here, because it's just an absolutely ludicrous game. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I kinda get a kick from that. I consider this very much a guilty pleasure game, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And again, this game has actually opened my eyes and made me see why people love games like Sonic 06 so much despite all of its flaws. But yeah, guys, that was Shadow 05. Quite an interesting experience, and an interesting experience I don't actually regret revisiting. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Adios.
You see all of me walk into